Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So today we will cover chapter 12 of the textbook, which is on full employment policy. So basically the chapter is about how we can achieve full employment and why full employment is useful as a policy goal, and the fact that the current style of monetary and fiscal policy does not emphasize full employment. Instead, it emphasizes price stability. So basically, during the Keynesian era, the goal of monetary and fiscal policy was to achieve full employment and price stability. But later on, for various reasons, the goal of full employment was dropped and the only emphasis became inflation targeting. So now employment can happen whatever is needed, but the price should be kept stable, which is basically inflation should be kept low. So the textbook proposes that there is an alternative to this. That this methodology is very costly. It's better to try to maintain full employment at all times, and the policy proposal is made that we should provide job guarantees, and then the analysis for how that works is done. That's the chapter outline. So one of the goals is that our target should be full employment, not, the price stability is the secondary target. Today the current practice is the opposite. Price stability is the first target, and full employment if possible, but otherwise not. So full employment should be the primary goal. The second point is that today policy is based on setting inflation rate as the target and using unemployment to control inflation. So for example, in Pakistan today we have massive unemployment, but the policy goal is being set to control inflation. So we want to look at how this can be done, how we can achieve full employment without creating inflation. This is the basic problem that is actual problem. That suppose that we tried to create full employment using standard Keynesian policy. If we use standard Keynesian policy, we would pursue a loose monetary policy to try to bring up inflation, and that probably would have some effect on reducing employment, but it would also lead to high inflation rates and maybe runaway inflation rates. So that's the trade-off, which the NAIRU, non-accelerating inflation rate unemployment, that's the what the theory says, that okay, whatever unemployment rate is today, that is the natural rate. If you try to push it below that, which is what we would try to do, then you will get accelerating inflation. So this seems like a bad policy in the sense that we allow unemployment to persist in order to control inflation. What happens if are there other ways that we can give everybody a job and still not have inflation? Seems like this should be possible to do. And there is the job guarantee scheme, which is discussed in this chapter. And there are also some other policies which can be used to create greater employment. All right, so now how does inflation happen? Basically that's, so One of the things is that the firms have certain target profit rates and they use markups to try to achieve those profit rates. But basically, as we have discussed the conflict theory of inflation, if the firms try to increase their profits, the prices rise and the workers' real wage goes down, and then the workers say that our wages should be higher. But when they raise wages, or when they try to increase their wages, now generally speaking, is even the workers go and say that we want higher wages, the firms have a choice. They can resist these wage demands, which will lead to strikes and discontent in the labor force, or they can accept. And what they do is it's usually cheaper for them to accept the wage demand. Okay, we'll allow you to increase the wages by 10%, and then they can increase the prices again by 10% by following the markup. So this creates the chain, which is what creates the inflationary spiral. So this is what creates inflation. Now, what happens when there is an exogenous squeeze on earnings? So basically, we are at some equilibrium where the firms are making a certain amount of profits and the workers are getting some real wages. Now suppose the oil prices go up. So generally speaking, the profits of the firm the revenue of the firm is going to go down, and now this has to be shared between the loss has to be shared between the workers and the firms. But there is no simple formula. The firm will try to pass on all of the loss to the workers, and the workers will try to pass all of the loss on to the firms, and this is what will generate the inflationary spiral. If the originally what might happen is that the costs are increased, the firms don't change the wages, but they hike up the prices. But now the workers notice that the real wages goes down, so they ask for a wage increase. And instead of trying to resist the wage increase, which is costly, they say, okay, have your wage increase and we will just increase the prices. And then this creates this spiral. So in this inflationary spiral, we have both cost push and demand pull factors which work together, so they can't be separated. So how can we create price stability? What traditional fiscal and monetary policy do is that they use unemployment to break this cycle. So suppose we have this inflationary cycle that has started, and we see that inflation is going up. What can we do? Well, we follow a contractionary monetary policy. This makes investment expensive, and so the aggregate demand goes down. When the aggregate demand goes down, the firms lay off workers. They're not going to produce anymore. So now you have unemployment. When you have unemployment, then the workers no longer make strong wage demands, or even if they do, the firms are in a position to resist them. That there's so much unemployment, they can hire other people. So this breaks the inflationary cycle, but there is a huge cost, that there is large amounts of unemployment that is used to check the inflation. So modern monetary theory offers an alternative methodology to control inflation, and that is called the employment buffer stock, which we will discuss later. All right, so this is just a recap of what we have said. All right, so these are the two alternatives that are the goal of this chapter. One is the NAIRU basis, which is that the fiscal policy is kept tight and the monetary policy is kept tight. What this does is that when the fiscal policy is tight, that means that the government does not spend very much. This is also called austerity, when the government tries to spend as much as it earns. And as we have discussed, this is based on a false analogy with the households, that the government should not spend more than it earns. Just like if a household earns some money, it cannot spend more than it earns. So the government is like that. This is not true. The government prints money so it can spend as much as it likes. And this is one aspect of economics which is very important to understand, because it is never stated. Why do we, the correct description of tight fiscal policy is that we want to create unemployment so that the laborers' wages are controlled, so that inflation is controlled. But this way of putting it, which is the correct description, would not be very appealing, and the workers would say that, well, no, why not reduce the profits of the firm and allow the wage of laborers to have full employment. Basically it's a battle between the shares. So basically the firms are much more powerful, so they get to dictate the narrative, what is being said, and also the policy, which is that you cut taxes on the corporations and you increase their profits. So over the past 30 years, all of the gains in productivity that has been made, which should have been shared between laborers and firms, they are all going to the firms because they have a lot of political power, while laborers don't have political power. Part of the political power is reflected in labor unions, which drive bargains with the firms, and labor unions have been broken up, and action has been taken against them to prevent this capturing of the profits by labor. Meanwhile, the economic theory says something completely different about this same thing, and it says that people get their marginal product. So if the laborers are asking for more than their marginal product, that's just harmful to the economy, and so on and so forth. So what is being said in theory provides actually a cover for the reality, and it presents the theory presents the things in a very different light from the reality, because this is not just because people are fools, but because this is the theory needs to provide a cover for the capitalist demands for extra profits. So now the policy alternative that is offered in the textbook is job guarantee, which means that you provide jobs to everyone at a fixed wage. This wage would be small, so everyone who comes in and he says, I want a job, he should be able to get a job at a minimum wage rate. This minimum wage should be sort of targeting the bottom of the labor pool, the least employable workers. This wage creates a market price for labor, and this creates a benchmark for the nominal wage. And since the government controls it, the wage demand, the markup will be in relation to this wage. So the prices will not inflate anymore because the government is controlling the minimum wage, and so this is another way to control inflation. So now the textbook argues that we should pursue full employment instead of this current policy where price stability or inflation targeting. Why? Because full employment, first of all, there is a simple consequence that if you have less than full employment, then you are not producing maximum amount of output. Also, people who lose jobs also suffer from social exclusion, and they cannot do what they want. They suffer from skill loss, because most of the training that workers receive is on the job. If you don't have a job, you don't get training. There is psychological harm to people, loss of self-confidence from inability to get a job. It also results in bad health and reduced life expectancy. People get demotivated, discouraged. Families are disrupted. Because unemployment falls heavily on those who are poor and disadvantaged, it creates greater inequality. Also, there is loss of social values in the sense that a society is supposed to be socially responsible. If we allow a large number of people to be miserable and poor without doing anything, then this damages us as human beings. So the textbook says that the NAIRU methodology, which is currently in practice, violates human rights because everyone has a right to a job. It lowers economic performance and it creates poverty and injustice. As opposed to this, the job guarantee program has many benefits. It has a social multiplier, that is, if everyone has a job, the society is happier, and this happiness multiplies. The private sector is inherently unable to create full employment, so relying on the private sector to create jobs cannot work as a strategy. And because the private sector has to look for profits, the government can give jobs even when it's not profitable for it to do so, and so the government has to step in order to create full employment. So a little bit of history. In the Keynesian revolution, which took place in the 1940s, from 1929, the Great Depression, to World War II, there was high unemployment. It was seen as temporary by the economists because they thought that the market would equilibrate, but for more than 10 years, the unemployment did not go down. So, in response to observing this, Keynes invented this new theory of general theory of employment. And since World War II, Keynesian theories were applied and they managed to create full employment. So, until the 1970s, the unemployment remained under 2%. After the 1970s, the Phillips curve appeared to break down, which led to this emergence of this NAIRU theory, the natural rate of unemployment, and it also led to the idea that if we try to do demand management, that will create inflation and it will not lower unemployment except temporarily. Because of this emergence of new theory, the central banks shifted their policies. Instead of targeting full employment, they started to use inflation targeting. This led to the creation of large amounts of unemployment or underemployment. Basically, this led to the creation of the reserve army of the unemployed, which is what restrains labor demand for high wage, and this is what prevents inflation. Low income of the people due to unemployment also suppresses aggregate demand, so the firms also cannot raise prices. So definitely this is effective in reducing inflation, but the cost is very high. So the consequences of the Chicago School theory coming into effect was that there was a rise in unemployment. Since the 70s, we have what is called secular stagnation. The economy is not growing very fast and there is high unemployment. Labor power has been reduced because of unemployment. Unions have been broken up. There has been a strong upward shift in the share of profits. The firms have captured all the productivity gains. And because of this, the rich getting richer, there has been massive rise in inequality and in concentration of health. But if you look at the goal of preventing inflation, that has worked. The inflation has been kept in check. There's not much inflation post-70s. In the OECD countries, you find that there has been low inflation over this past 30 years. Low inflation and high unemployment. This has been created by tight monetary policies that are recommended by the NAIRU principles. Also tight fiscal policy, which is austerity. This has had huge costs, basically because what we have used is the poor unemployed people to battle inflation. So the cost of adjustment has been borne by the disadvantaged people who have no voice in the society, and this has also created a huge efficiency cost because the economies have operated below their potential. So this has had tragic consequences, high social costs, growth has been lowered, capability of economy to produce has been damaged, it has had long-run harmful effects. People have talked about the lost decade of the 90s where there was no growth. And the question that is asked, that suppose that we control inflation at all this cost, can we get back to employment without recreating inflation? I mean, the price you're paying is too high. So NAIRU addresses the symptoms of the problem but not the cause. Inflation control has been brought but at a high price. So the alternative of the text is to seek full employment. And how can that be done? By creating an employment buffer stock. The imposition of taxes is created by the demand for money. Imposition of taxes creates the demand for money. So, contrary to the usual idea that money leads to, that the demand for money leads to inflation, it's actually the other way around. You can print money, this is exercise, create fiscal deficit, and that's what's the basic constraint. The governments ask, how will we pay for a jobs guarantee program? So this question is not valid in the sense that the government can print money to pay people for the jobs. Now, there will be consequences, and these consequences have to be calculated. But it is not that the government cannot provide jobs because it doesn't have the money. Now, for an individual, for me or you, if we are told that hire somebody at certain wage, we can say that I don't have the money to hire somebody because my budget doesn't have that. But the government cannot say that. So the value of currency is then determined by the wages that are paid in the job guarantee program. That is the work effort that you can purchase for money. So this creates the value for the money. If we were just to freely distribute money, then the value of money would go to zero. And that is what basically inflation means. So this is exactly the crunch point of the jobs guarantee program, that we could certainly give jobs, but we have to make sure that these jobs are productive. If we announce that everybody who wants to get a job can get a job, and we announce a wage, and then people go in and sign up their names and they start receiving money, but they don't do anything, then this will cause a disaster. So the issue is how to, you have to not just create jobs, you have to create jobs which are productive. Analysis of the post-war period in which there was full employment says that there were sectors of the economy which were, we studied in our labor lecture, that there are low paid informal sectors of the economy where anybody could get a job. These were bad jobs, but you could get jobs. So as long as that there is such a sector where anybody can get a job, this leads to full employment, and this leads to social cohesion, in the sense that nobody is left out of the picture. So just like the central bank is the lender of the last resort, when the banks lend money and they cannot cover the cash requirements, they can always go to the central bank to borrow cash. So the government should be the employment of the last resort. It should, so if somebody cannot find any jobs in the private sector, then he should be able to get into the job guarantee program. This creates a buffer pool. It has to be understood that this job guarantee program is targeted to the bottom of the labor pool. So these will be the minimum wage, and will provide everybody, if you can get a job, you will prefer the job in the private sector because it would be better than the minimum job. So this creates a buffer pool of, just like the unemployment pool, it creates a buffer pool, but this time everybody in this buffer will be having the minimum job rather than being unemployed. So aggregate wage is still stabilized and aggregate demand is stabilized. The business cycle is smoothed by this method. Instead of having the reserve army of the unemployed expand and contract with the business cycle, the number of people who hold guaranteed jobs will expand and contract with the business cycle. Now, how can we actually implement this? The job guarantee program guarantees full employment because everybody who wants to can get a job at the minimum wage. In designing this program, we have to consider interference with the private sector minimum wage. So, for example, if we set a wage that is higher than what some people are earning in the market, and that's easily possible, then those people will lose jobs, and the argument is made that productivity will decline because these people were previously working and now you have given them jobs. But if the productivity is low in the private sector, then this may be a desirable thing to do, because if people are earning wages which are not enough for them and their families, then we want to get rid of those jobs and create better jobs. Minimum wage should provide a living wage, and it should not be affected by the private sector capability to pay, and low payers should exit. This does not interfere with fiscal policy to create better jobs. But the crucial point, which is not said in this textbook but which is very important, is that this means that the government should be able to create productive jobs, more productive than the low productivity jobs in the private sector. And this is a big question mark. So job guarantee program, if implemented, will be an automatic stabilizer when the economy is in a boom. Then people will go off the job guarantees and get private sector jobs, and they will come back onto the job guarantee if they lose these jobs. So if there is a recession, more people will be in the job guarantee program. This also automatically ensures that when there is a expansion, the fiscal policy will contract, because the amount of money that the government has to spend on the buffer pool will be less, and when there is a recession, then automatically the government will spend more. So this is counter-cyclical fiscal policy, which is exactly how it should be. Generally speaking, this is better than the reserve army of the unemployed because it stabilizes the aggregate demand. See, when people go out of jobs, that gives a big shock to the aggregate demand, because you had somebody who was earning and now he's earning zero. So aggregate demand declines a lot. Because the minimum wage is a living wage, so the aggregate demand remains within the economy, and so that is not such a big problem. And also the productive capacity of the economy remains in use throughout the cycle, unlike the standard business cycle where firms simply shut down some factories because they cannot, because the aggregate demand is low. One argument that was used against fiscal policy is that there's a policy lag. When the government when the economy is in a recession, then the government might start some infrastructure project, but it might take an year or two to get started up. In the meantime, the economy might change the cycle, and now the stimulus that's being applied is exactly in the wrong direction. Also, it was said that the government yani is like an elephant. It moves very slowly. So now that the infrastructure project has started, it can't stop it down, and it will. So these were the reasons that Friedman gave, that the monetary and fiscal policy act with long and variable lags. You can't predict, you can't forecast. So the effects of the policy can end up being harmful rather than helpful. So here the job guarantee program is very simple. It just goes into operation right away, so there is no policy lag, so it avoids this objection. So the benefits of the universal job guarantee program is that it guarantees human rights. Everyone has a right to a job, ensures full employment and max production. But as we will see, there are some tricky things that one needs to do to make sure that the job guarantee program works. This is in addition to the social safety nets. So there are many people who cannot work, widows, families, children, elderly, handicapped. So social safety nets have to be there for them. But also we need to ensure that the jobs being given are productive jobs, so that socially useful products and services are produced in addition to what the market produces. Now, is this just a theory, or has it been put into practice? Well, there's lots of people who have tried these programs, but in the form that the textbook is suggesting, it has never been done. There is no universal job guarantee which has been adopted throughout the economy for long periods of time. But all the experience that we have is partial and temporary. Job guarantees are given to a small segment of population and for a small period of time. So how does job guarantee control inflation? We've already discussed that there is this buffer stock of the people who have job guarantee employments, and basically one of the important aspects of this job guarantee is that the government competes for laborers, but it competes at the bottom. The standard Keynesian policy, fiscal policy, competes equally with the private sector, and that's what driving out the crowding out effect refers to. If the government starts investment projects, then it attracts laborers who were working at good jobs in the normal marketplace. It can't really get a good project going with just bad laborers. So there is this crowding out effect when the government does fiscal policy. So here the job guarantee program is supposed to hire people who will lay bricks, who will do basically unskilled, any bottom class labor. It does not compete at the top of the bottom pool, at the top of the labor pool. So these are the job guarantee should give jobs to those people who are the least employable in the real labor pool. So instead of, if you think of a spectrum of the labor, the most attractive to the least attractive, the government starts from the opposite end, so it should not have competition. Of course, this is hard. This is the theory. It's hard to turn it into practice. So some accounting identities. The private sector sells consumer goods, investment goods, goods to the government, and goods to the export centers, foreigners, which earns revenue. This revenue is used to purchase consumer goods, to put it into savings, to pay taxes, and to purchase imports. So basically the earning equals spending equation is C plus I plus G plus X is equal to C plus S plus T plus M. This is a very bad notation. I didn't have time to improve it, but next time I will think about how to make it better, because C is being used in two different senses here. But anyway, this is how the textbook drew, so I'm following the textbook. So you can also think of it in terms of injections of money and leakages. So government is making purchases, the foreigners are making purchases, the investors are purchasing investment goods, and this is money which is coming in, so that's injection. The consumers cancel because the consumer injection is equal to the consumer leakage, so that can be taken out. And so these are the money coming in. Where is the money going out? Money is going out to pay in savings, in taxes, and in purchasing imports. So the injection should equal the leakages in equilibrium. The multiplier effect is that suppose one of these injections is increased. It could be government, it could be exports. Let's just think of investment. So there is a positive change in delta I. What this will lead to is increased incomes for the consumers, and this increased consumer will go into more consumption, more savings, more taxes, and more imports. So this is one of the issues that one needs to think about when you are pursuing expansionary monetary policy, especially the job guarantee program. You are pumping a lot of money into the economy. So what will happen with this money? Well, this will drive additional consumer purchases, additional imports, additional taxes, and additional savings. So when you produce consumer goods, then there is an issue as to whether you are at capacity production. If you are at capacity production, then this additional money will create inflation. And if you produce additional imports, then as will happen, then what will happen is that this will lead to a reduction in the exchange rate, because the value of your rupee will go down because you are demanding more foreign goods. So these are both harmful effects of pursuing this job guarantee program. So, assuming that you are not at capacity and that somehow you can control the imports, then there will be then the production of consumer goods will expand, and this will lead to multiplier effects, second round, third round, fourth round. If you are at capacity, then this will not work, and this will create inflation and reduction in exchange rate. So these are the costs that you might have to pay if you implement a job guarantee program which is not well designed. So now in these costs, again, this is not the end of the story. Suppose that you are take imports out of the picture for the moment. Suppose that you make your currency non-convertible, which is actually the right one way. The other way that which the textbook says is that allow there to be freely floating exchange rates. So initially you will generate additional demand, but then this will adjust the exchange rate, and so the extra demand will be removed by the adjustment of the exchange rate. So this has further consequences, but I won't worry about that. But now what happens when you push, you are creating extra demand for consumer goods? The response to that depends on the potential for capacity expansion. Initially, see, inflation is not all bad, because when the prices rise, this gives the signal to the consumers that there's more profits to the firms, and so they will try to expand their capacity to produce more goods. So now it depends on what kind of where the money is going. For example, if it goes into real estate, this is not very good because it will expand. It will appreciate prices but will not expand productive capacity. If it goes into stocks, this will again cause inflation in prices but will not lead to expanded capacity. But if it goes into the real estate sector and goes into construction industry, then the extra profits will create expansion of capacity in the construction sector. So inflation is not necessarily good, not necessarily bad, but it has to be targeted at the right sector where there is extra productive capacity, or where extra productive capacity can be created. So all of these are fairly complicated effects, and analysis required to pursue the policies of the kind being recommended here is rather complicated. It is not done in this text. So what are the consequences of this job guarantee program? In the traditional system, equilibrium occurs at point where the injections are the elite wages, but in this equilibrium there is no guarantee of full employment. This is the standard Keynesian analysis. So creating full employment requires increasing aggregate demand. This can be done by increasing the government expenditures, which is fiscal policy, or investments, and this can be done by the private sector, or export demand can also increase aggregate demand. One thing that is not mentioned in this text is also that money creation or credit creation by the private sector, this can also increase aggregate demand. So the fundamental balance equation is that G minus T is the government spending minus the government taxation, which is the earning. So this is called the government deficit, but we can think of it as the government injection of money into the private sector. Exports minus imports, this is the foreigners' injection of money into the private sector, because the foreigners pay for the exports, so they are injecting money, but they receive money back for the imports. So this is the net foreign injections of money. So basically we can say that the government injections of money plus the foreign injections of money is equal to the private savings. The private savings is the earnings of the private sector minus the spending of the private sector. Now, this is the fundamental equation which is written in the books in a different way, which is not very confusing. This one makes it clear, and this needs further analysis again, which I didn't have time to do. But you can see this as follows. Basically, the government injects some money, the foreigners inject some money, and the financial sector, by creating credit out of scratch, injects some money. And now these are the three sources from which money comes in, and then there are two basic places where the money can be stored. It can go into consumer savings, or it can go into firm profits. So to take the base case, this is easiest to understand. And this is what we did in our simple model. Suppose there is no injections, no foreigners, no government, and no banks. So we have this economy, we have firms, we have laborers. The laborers sell their labor to the firms. The firms produce goods and sell the goods back to the laborers. Then nobody can make any money, because the amount of money at the beginning is the same as the amount of money at the end. No money is being created, no money is coming in, no money is going out. So net profits must be zero and net savings must be zero. Now the firms can make profit only if the private sector draws down its savings, or if the private sector tries to save, then the firm will make negative profits. So because that's very simple. So the only way that the firms can make profits is if some money is coming in to the system. And the money can come in from foreigners, or it can come in from the government, or it can come in from credit creation. And all of these are sources which lead to money. And once money is coming in, then the firms can make profits. Now, since the firms are motivated by profit making in a capitalist economy, if the firms are not making profits, which is what happens when you are pursuing austerity, then basically the economy will die, because the firms will collapse. Some of them will make profits, many of them will go bankrupt, and the consumers who are trying to build up savings, they will also not be able to achieve their end. So basically austerity is very bad for the economy. So this idea everywhere that we should control, which you will be reading in the newspapers, that, oh, the deficit is going up, oh, Pakistan is going to die because the deficit is going to... This is just ridiculous. Even you will hear this complaint from top economists. What MMT does correctly is to say that the deficit number does not matter. A deficit can be too high. If you pump in too much money, you can have bad effects, and if you pump in too little, it can also have bad effects. But the effect has to be evaluated in terms of its impact on the economy, not in terms of deficit is at 7% or 8% or 9%, or it's in so many billion rupees. Oh no. So what has been the experience with job guarantees? Well, I read 2 papers. One is on Argentina job guarantee program. It was a job guarantee program given to the heads of households only, and it was for a limited period of time. And in India, they have Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee, which guarantees 100 days of employment. So these are the 2 programs that I have looked at briefly, and there have been others. So the evaluation of this program, there is a paper which I have loaded on the website. It offers 100 days of guaranteed employment per year, and they studied this. They interviewed people who had been in this program and asked them about their experience using focus group methods. You know about focus group? Basically, there are 2 types of methods we use in surveys. One is the quantitative econometric type, which I don't like because people are deceived by numbers, but in some cases it's important and necessary and useful. But the other group, the focus group, is that you get some people and you sit them in a room, you talk to them, and that gives you a lot more information, but it's a qualitative type of information. So they found that the experience of people varied depending on how this wage, the guaranteed wage, compared to the market wage. So that's one thing. The people would have complained that because actually, and at least according to theory, the minimum wage is supposed to be the worst wage. So obviously, people who are going into the program will not like it. They will say that we should get, and it's supposed to create productive jobs as well. And you're not just giving them money, but you want to make sure that they do enough work, because basically that is going to determine the value of money. To the extent that, suppose that we did this in Pakistan. In fact, this was under consideration, and after studying this, I said that no, we should not offer job guarantee in Pakistan right now because we don't have the capability to implement the program. If the government just says that, okay, we will hire 1,000 more naib qasids and they can do whatever they like, they just sit and swat flies, then there is going to be the value of money will be less. Many people who are real naib qasids and working, they will leave these jobs and they will go to these. This will disrupt the market and it will reduce the value of money. So we don't have the, you need to give jobs, but you need to make sure that the people work, and to do that and add something productive to the economy. And if you can't do that, then it can be more harmful. So these programs are implemented by the communities, and they had instructions on how to use the people, and they were supposed to do difficult jobs in the village, of which there are many. There is no loss of jobs. People are doing lots of jobs, but making sure that people who get participate in this program do jobs, that's a different matter. Like in the rural schools, you can't even get the teachers to come in and do their job unless you design it properly. So one of the considerations is how much you pay, because that also governs how willing the people are to work, but also the local implementation, how exactly the program is implemented, because how you assign people to jobs, etc. Higher wages, more opportunities for work, better implementation, and get greater recognition of caregiving responsibilities of women will be required for this policy to fully meet its goals. So these are some of the conclusions from the focus group discussions. So the Argentinian experience, the paper really praises this very high. Again, there was a crisis in Argentina. Argentina had pegged its currency to the dollar for various reasons, and this led to a spectacular crash of the economy in 2001. Now you see, this is real economics. We're not discussing this, but this is something that you need to learn. You should find out why Argentina pegged its currency. Why did this lead to collapse? These are the questions which nobody is learning, and this is where your comparative advantage will be. I am trying to produce, I don't know if you saw the last lecture of Tariq Banouri at the AGM. Did anybody attend this here? No. It's available on the web. I will try to put a link to it on your page. Basically what he said is that we should focus on producing export quality goods, and in a knowledge economy, export quality good is an export quality education. So I am giving you today an export quality education. That is, this is the best that is available in the world. And one of the things that is not the economists think of their subject as being a science. So they say that history doesn't have anything to do with it. What we are trying to do is study theories. But this is a very wrong way of thinking about the matter. Actually, theory is developed by looking at history. You can't get rid of theory. That is, you can't just say, I'm going to study history, this happened and then that happened. Because theory tells you that if this happens, then this will cause that to happen. And only theory can tell you that. History only shows X happened and then Y happened. The causes are not there in the history. So but you need both of them. And you need to study, and in fact the ratio is the opposite. I mean, after studying 90% history, then you can understand a little bit of theory, that after seeing this happens so many times, this happened in Argentina, this happened in Venezuela, this happened in Mexico. Once you see all of this, then you see, oh, this is how things work, and then you can think about developing theory. So you have to have a lot of knowledge about real world economic events before you can understand theory. Now if you just start writing equations, as people do, then they never understand what these equations have to do with any reality. Sometimes equations can have something to do with reality, but not much and not often. And most of the equations that your fellow graduate students in PhD program are studying have nothing to do with reality. And this has been said over and over again by leading economists like Paul Romer, that these macroeconomics models we study are divorced from reality. They have nothing to do with. So in the Argentina program, there was a big crash. The economy crashed. So how to put the economy back up? Well, they introduced this employment guarantee program, which was called the Jefe de Hogar Desocupados, the Chief of Family Unemployed. Program for, Jefes and Jefas. Oh, I see. Jefes is male. Program for unemployed male and female heads of households. So every head of household was guaranteed a job. This is very good, and in the sense that even if you just give money to head of household, you will maintain the family, and that's very useful because the family is actually doing social work. And when you destroy the family, as happened via unemployment in many communities in the USA, then you destroy the fabric of society. Then you create children who are robbers, thieves, drug addicts, and maladjusted people. And this actually happened in many places where. So here, even if they don't do any productive work, protecting the family is still a valuable social product. But if you give them jobs and they can do work, that's even better. So this program, even though it was quite small in the sum of 1% of GDP, it got rid of the contraction of the economy very quickly, and it recovered very quickly from one of the worst social and economic crises in history. So here is some data from this book. It shows that in 2002 you had a growth rate of minus 11% and an unemployment rate of 21%, which went up to 32%. But in 2003, they started this program, and the unemployment rate went from 21 to 17%, and the employment rate jumped up by 4%. And next year, the unemployment rate went from 17 to 15, 18 to 15 to 12 to 10. So the program, Hefedi Hogar, was very successful in bringing down employment. And it was not because, this is the important thing, it was not because the government gave a job to everybody. This unemployment, the government gave job only to a few people, but because it was a guaranteed job, this created aggregate demand, which worked through a multiplier effect. It picked up the economy back up, and it got back on its feet. So the other graph shows the formal employment level, which shows that it had a bottom in December 2002, and then it started going up when the program went into effect in 2003, and then it just kept going. The purchasing power of the minimum wage at the end of 2006 was more than double that of 2001. So unemployment was reduced very sharply, very quickly, and it was not because the government gave jobs to everybody, but only because of the buffer stock which allowed the recovery. So this was a very successful program. This is the evaluation written in the paper. Now, there were structural problems in production of some goods as wage goods. Now what does this mean? Basically, you see, as you hire people, you are going to produce a demand for things that people buy with wages. And what are the things people buy with wages? They're going to buy food. So, if we want to put in a job guarantee program in Pakistan, what do we need to think about? We are going to give them money. What are they going to do with it? Well, okay, they're going to do their jobs. They're going to clean the streets and build bridges and maybe clean up the parks. And actually that's one thing, and we can ask them to build parks to attract tourists and so on. So all of this is good, but as soon as they get the money, they're going to go buy food. So do we have enough food for them? If not, this is going to cause a huge jump in food prices. So one of the things that we should do is to try to engage them in programs which create food. And you have to think about what is the impact of this money going to be. So what can you do? There are some very interesting programs in urban areas. In the villages, of course, growing food is not a difficult problem. You can in rural areas you can provide them with either land if there is available, or work on higher yield products, use technology to produce more, etc. In the cities, there are many programs which have been developed. For example, rich people have lots of lawn areas, and programs were developed where they could grow vegetables in their patches. So if these programs So with the cooperation. So in fact, in China they have very good programs for producing a lot of food on a small amount of land. In our neighborhood there was a Chinese family, and they had a small plot of land in front of their door, and they were using this to produce a large number of Chinese vegetables which they were selling commercially, just on a small handful of land. So this kind of scheme. So if we employ people in a job guarantee program, we have to make sure that food supplies are increased, because that's the first place the wages are going to go. So they have to be, and then there are other effects. Today in Pakistan we are importing billions of dollars worth of food, and that's one very important thing we must avoid, because that would, and if these people start buying imported food, that would have a massive, and if Pakistan is at max capacity for food, which has happened due to the bad exchange rate, due to the fact, most people believe that rupee should be strong, but actually rupee has been much stronger than it should have been. We should not, and rupee should be sufficiently weak that people don't go think about buying milk from Australia, and orange juice from Germany, and other imports from Brazil. In fact, one of the papers showed that due to the World Bank report on inter-regional trade showed that in some cases it's cheaper to import products from Brazil than it is to buy from your neighboring country. So that's why this is what it means, structural problem in terms of wage goods. A country must have the capacity of securing these goods to avoid shortages, inflations, or problems that will affect the viability of this program. This is saying in a very complex and awkward language something very simple, that these people, if you're going to wage goods, that's food, and other wage goods, basic goods that families buy with low income, we should have the capacity to produce these. If the people receive money and they have to buy these goods and they cannot buy them, then we will have problems. We're not talking about inflation now. Inflation will occur, but the question is that there is a certain amount of supply and there's a demand. If the demand is in excess of supply, then something has to adjust, and that's going to be a problem. Development of tools to evaluate ex ante. Basically, this is very important, because once you introduce this program, this is going to have major effects on the economy. And economy is such a complex beast that unless you assess what's happening as a result of this program, many things will happen and you won't know, was it this program which caused it or is it something else? This program requires high level of coordination between the public and the private sector. So again, you understand that, how the program was implemented in India was that money was given to communities to hire people. Now, we must make sure that the communities are working correctly, that they are hiring the right people and they are getting jobs done. It's not that the chief of the village is putting all of his relatives on the payroll and nobody does any work. So this is the coordination, and transparency and participation is required, and political legitimacy is also required, because the people are going to say that this is what's happening regardless of whether or not it's happening. You see, what happens is that when you push a lot of money, maybe 99% of the cases things are working well, and 1% of the case things are working badly. But what will come in the headlines in the newspaper is that, look, this person is has hired his relative, and 10 people are working on this program without money, and the thousands of people who are doing honest work will not make the headlines. And so this political legitimacy is also very important. And if you can back up the numbers, yes, there's 10% leakage, but 90% of the program is working, that's a very useful sort of information to have. So you need efficient and creative management. As you run these new types of programs, new types of problems will come up and you will have to resolve them on the spot. serious technical and evaluation transparency and strong political will are required to succeed on this program. So, so it's not something you can go and implement on the fly as it is. But it's very important to try to do this because the standard way of managing the economy, which we are using right now for the want of a better method, is very bad, very harmful to the economy. But the alternative is, there's no easy alternative. So if we are trying to do job creation, we have to do it step by step in a stable and smooth way. So there are some alternatives to this policy of job creation. This depends on the diagnosis. So some of the diagnoses are the behaviorist, that the people don't get jobs because they don't have the skills, they're not psychologically equipped, so on. There's the structuralist problem, that people have the skills but for the wrong type of jobs. These are all sort of excuses that the textbook says, that basically when you have a certain number of jobs and this number is less than the number of people who want jobs, then you're going to have unemployment. It's just a question of counting. So the only solution is job creation. You can't but from the point of view, it will look like a structural mismatch, because the jobs that are available, they will fill them with the best candidates. So for exactly as the fallacy of composition shows, the person who is looking for a job, he will say that the early bird gets the worm, and I worked hard and I prepared for the interviews, that's why I got the job, and so that's what everyone should do. But even if everyone does it, if the number of jobs are not enough, then this will not work, even though this particular strategy works for one person. So that's what creates the illusion that if you work hard and you have skills and you have good interviews, you will get a job. But that doesn't mean that this is a strategy which will work for everybody. So what Minsky says about this job guarantee scheme is that we should not think in a two-stage way, which is all that first we educate the people, then we train the people, then we get them jobs. No, you should give them jobs to whoever is there right away in his current situation and use on-the-job training. Find out what this person can do and create a job in accordance with this, because this two-stage method does not work. First of all, it is blaming the workers, it's putting the responsibility on the workers. You don't have the skills and education, that's why you don't have a job. And also, it takes a long time to produce a worker. If you want to give them training in refrigerator skills, it's a 3-year vocational program. And the economy is very dynamic, it's moving around. Today, we give everybody computer skills, tomorrow there's unemployment in the IT sector. So, the textbook goes on to a historical overview that the Keynesian policies maintained full employment over the post-war period, but it had a stop-go pattern. There were business cycles. At the top of the cycle, you would run contractionary policy. In the bottom of the cycle, you would run expansionary policy. But in the 73, this had its own disadvantages. But overall, high employment was maintained, so it was good for economy. In the 73, there was this oil crisis which led to stagflation and led to the floating currency and led to the return of Chicago economics. This Chicago economics has been largely unsuccessful. They have not managed to create growth. They have not managed to reduce unemployment. But for many reasons, we don't want to go back to Keynesian policies right now. For one thing, Keynesian is not the correct, and it's a good general idea. Yes, you should throw money at the economy, it makes it work. But now we know that this is not right. You have to do sectoral targeting. This is the way that the Japanese economy achieved high growth rates. You throw money at the right sectors of the economy where there is expansionary capacity. So you don't throw money at those sectors which cannot expand. because like real estate, you see, land is a sector which is just fixed. And so you throw money at it, the prices will rise, but there will be no expansion in productive capacity. But you throw money at the construction industry, that will get people to move to become laborers in the construction. It will expand your cement factories and steel, etc., and so on. This has to be looked at very carefully. There's something which is called activity analysis. It looks at what are the inputs that go into producing a given output. So you make a matrix of all the things that are coming in, all the things that are going out. To produce 1 unit of steel, you need so many workers, you need so many raw material, you need so much gas, and so on. So this kind of thing, this is called the downstream calculations. Then you have to do the upstream calculations, that once this thing is produced, where does it get used? So you have to throw money at the economy, just like Keynes, in order to get it work. And you have money to throw, but if you throw money in the wrong places, you can damage the economy. If you throw it in the right places, you can make it grow. And doing so requires a lot of skillful understanding and analysis and data. Because JG is not so easy to implement, people have tried alternatives. One is indirect job creation. You give stimulus, you ask people to hire more laborers and you subsidize them. So this can work, but it is dangerous. It creates leakages. Firms use these to subsidize. So for example, I have workers, I'm getting money to hire people, so I actually fire some of my own people and then I rehire them with the government subsidy. So now I'm back to where I was, but now I'm getting government subsidies. So that's one of the problems. There are many such. It's very hard to police and monitor, is job creation really going on? Because actually job creation is normally going on. We're normally expanding. So the new jobs, you have to do excess expansion. If I was going to hire 3 people, I should be hiring 4. That's very hard to figure out. That are we doing real job creation or is this just normal? So that's one of the problem. How do you prevent leakages? How do you make sure that real jobs are being created? It's not so easy to monitor when you give the money to private sector. But there are ways to do it, so it works. It's just that there are leakages and you have to calculate, is there leakages, is this a good leakage or is this substantial or not? But the other problem is that the private sector wants to hire the best. So we want to go to the opposite end of the labor pool, and that's not where your firms are going to hire. Even if you get the firms to expand and job create, they will get the best of the labor pool. So the bottom, the poorest people will not be affected. And that's what the government job guarantee can do. Also, this time span, normally what you want to do is to give people guarantees for a short period, okay, for 1 year. Like an example of this is the HEC interim placement program, which gives jobs to PhDs for 1 year at HEC expense. And it expects that those people who get jobs, they will then continue on in the job market. This is a very useful step because someone who comes back with a PhD from it, it's not easy to get a job, even whether a domestic PhD or because the job market is very slow. Even suppose I say that I want to hire 5 new professors. If I start now, it will be by September. I'll have to advertise, get applicants, screen them, interview them. It's a long, and then again there are government bureaucratic steps that I have to. If I want to advertise, I can't advertise tomorrow. It will take 2 or 3 weeks to get the advertisement done. So anyway, so this kind of the interim placement, it places them for 1 year, but then the firms might prefer, and this actually happens, that okay, now I have an interim candidate for 1 year, he can take care of 2 or 3 courses, get rid of him, next year hire another interim candidate. So this is not what HEC wants. We want, even though it's not so harmful, because 1 year of experience puts him in a better position in the job market. So, but ideally I should, in fact, when HEC sends us people, it says that we expect you to hire him. I mean, the default is that he will get hired. I mean, you should not just hire people intending to fire them. You should hire people intending to hire them. Of course, if he doesn't perform, you're not forced to. So the issue of how high to set the wage, this is very important, because the level will create market disturbance. If you set it too low, of course, no one will accept it. If you set it too high, you will drive people out of the job market. So again, this is a critical issue. So this is the final section of the textbook. It says that direct jobs guarantees of the government, the concluding section, that the Keynesian policy of raising aggregate demand, the classical policy of providing training in education, and providing incentives to private employers for them to make more jobs, all three of these are useful but not sufficient. These will not give jobs to everybody, and so there is no alternative to a job guarantee program. So the strong recommendation made by the textbook is that we should implement job guarantee programs, but there are a number of hurdles that need to be taken care of in doing this, and we should. But this is the only socially equitable. In this, I am 100% agreed with the textbook, because this is also actually the Islamic procedure. Islamic procedure is not to give dole to people, because that's against dignity and self-respect. It's to guarantee jobs. Guarantee jobs is exactly the Islamic solution. We don't give charity to people. We expect people to work for their money. But we should, the government should make sure that everybody is able to work. This part the government is responsible for, and this is what should be done, and this is long theoretical support for this. All right.